Welcome to episode 23 of the Watchman Privacy Podcast, Lubomir Arsov, Finding the Private Self. I'm Gabriel Custodiet, a privacy consultant and author of The Watchman Guide to Privacy, which you can find on Amazon. In this episode, I speak with Lubomir Arsov, most popularly known as the creator of a 13-minute animated film called In Shadow, which is quite powerful and explores in a way that only art and music can many of the problems the world faces today. I recommend watching this video, linked in the description, definitely with headphones, and even if just for the first few minutes. It was through In Shadow that I discovered Mr. Arsov and reached out to him. I sensed that he was a man who had some insights on surveillance, on the use of technology to control behavior, on the power of pop culture to manufacture personalities, and many other concerns of modern man in search of a soul. Necessarily, this conversation gets philosophical, though I do purposefully ask many questions about practical solutions for his penetrating observations. Mr. Arsov is above all an artist, and you should watch In Shadow to understand more about him. Arsov is not publicly active, and you can guess the reasons after watching the film. But his website, inshadow.net, allows you to explore the project a bit more and donate something to it. Please don't forget to contribute to the free projects of independent people. Lubomir Arsov, welcome to the Watchman Privacy Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Gabriel. Thank you for having me on.
I believe that you're based in Toronto, and I guess I just wanted to ask you, because In Shadow has resonated a lot with people, especially the last couple of years. If you're willing, what has Toronto been like, and what have been your observations of Canada and human psychology in the past couple of years?
Oh, well, good question. Toronto is a big urban center. It's a multicultural city. It has a lot of commerce, pop culture, a lot of activism, and kind of is an interesting microcosm of what city life, modern city life in the West is. And I've had a love-hate relationship for it for the 25 years that I've resided there. I no longer live in Toronto. Actually, my partner and I live in South America due to the absurd circumstances that have befallen many of our countries. To go directly into your question is over the last few years, of course, with the pandemic situation, it has really magnified human psychology under duress. And I think it's under duress that we know people more accurately, or we know their instinctual and unconscious makeup because there's less choice. And when there's more fear, more social pressure, we get to see people for people's programs and their essence. And so, I don't know where you stand with this. We haven't spoken about it. I don't know where your audience stands with it, but in somewhat vague but yet clear terms, I'll just say, the last 2 years have clearly been to me kind of like a parapolitical plan woven in with some very strange other aspects that are prepping and gearing up on a huge infrastructure of surveillance capitalism, as well as managed behavior, managed thinking, managed movement, stuff that we've seen before from the managerial class, but it's at a very audacious and global level. And so, with that premise, we've seen a lot of propaganda, which is verifiable propaganda. We've seen a lot of cooked statistics, blatant lies, and other types of information that have created a chaotic atmosphere for the general human being who generally subsists on television or internet and just kind of like general mainstream consensus sources of what reality is. And those human beings, I don't think we're ready to contend with this the amount of pressure and resources that were put into warping their map of reality and creating a very fearful and, in my opinion, false narrative of what is happening. And so people have been very ready to do very absurd and humiliating things. They've been able to be colonized both bodily, mentally, emotionally. People have turned against each other, have demonized each other, have become very irrational. And this is all based on the lower impulses that we as a society and as individuals have not faced, which is really dealing with our feeling valid fears, valid shame, valid guilt that we all hold to various degrees, which readily plug into a system of coercion.
Let me kind of change the subject. We'll get back to some of the big issues, but I'm curious what you think about the topic, the concern of privacy these days. Is privacy important in your view? Are people approaching it in the wrong way?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting question for me. And you contacted me some time ago, and I checked out your podcast, and it brought up like the fact that you mostly concentrate on this topic. I found very interesting, and I realized that I'm somewhat negligent as far as my hygiene goes in online and other activities. And I'd love to break this down deeper. And you have obviously a lot of insight on this, so I'd love to hear it. I started thinking about the fundamentals of this question of why do I need privacy and why does someone want to breach my privacy? And both of those issues are interesting. So the more that I go deeper within myself and uncover the essence of my, it's as cliche as it sounds, my true self, the immaculate being connected to something greater, the less I'm concerned about concealing anything about myself in the now. However, knowing that there are certain forces in this world working toward centralizing and who are basically working against my best interests and the best interests of human sovereign beings. Since I know there are those forces, I'm also strategic in concealing my next steps. So I'm not so concerned about divulging who I am, but as far as planning for the well-being of myself, my family, and those around me, I definitely do not want to divulge any of the maybe even psychological makeup that I may possess that will jeopardize any of my future movements, which are essential for my and others' well-being. So, having said that, privacy it's interesting to me why certain factions require this breach of privacy and want to know who we are, what we are doing at all times. And to me, that comes down to some sort of fear ultimately and a need for control, a certain paranoia.
At the end of my privacy guide, I kind of pose an argument that maybe foolishly contradicts the whole book, but Andrew Henderson, he's the nomad capitalist, and he has a line. He says, "Being free means having nothing to hide."
Yeah, I think there is definitely a difference between the practical aspects and the philosophical aspects. And I do think, I don't know if we should go into the more philosophical, spiritual realm, but that feels right for me because I think privacy can, just like everything, can go into these two polar extremes, and there's a spectrum of a gradient between that. And one extreme is a certain paranoia and perhaps a detachment from the outer world, distrust that may be based on formative wounds, and one's need of keeping oneself completely, owning oneself in a way that's separate from everyone and is somewhat paranoid and distrustful. And I'm not saying that's invalid, but I think the more that we expand and grow, in both in sovereignty and personal power and affluence, etc., that reservation to really be extremely private, sort of the walls kind of collapse as we have more strength and agency. So the more that we have that inner power, the less I think we need to really protect and hold on to stuff very zealously.
When some people, they're not afraid of whoever having their data, but sometimes I try to break it down as philosophically as I can, and I simply say, look, the basic reality, the basic essence of the universe is that we all have our private mind, and the private mind is our consciousness, right? Is our reality, and all of reality is filtered through that. And so it's important to cultivate that. Yes, we let people in, and we're all the richer for it, but we also like to block stuff out. And it seems to me that a lot of people today don't seem to have an inner private self, or they haven't been cultivating that. So, would you agree with that idea? And if so, what are some things that people can do to, as you said, get in touch with this private self, cultivate it, and push out a lot of the white noise, the entertainment, all these kinds of things that are coming in and, in some sense, contaminating our minds?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people don't care about privacy because, like you said, very eloquently, a lot of people don't have an inner self, or maybe that's quite a broad statement, but a lot of people, I think, are standardized in their personalities simply because we adopt cultural artifacts as personal qualities. And so a lot of us, myself included, we carry parts of different systems that we are part of. And a lot of times consciousness needs various systems, familial, there's all kinds of systems in order to keep ascending and keep developing and then letting them go. However, with a lot of our folk around us, they do subsist mainly from these cultural aspects and no actual unique human spark. Unfortunately, that's at least what I'm witnessing. It's quite an accusation, but I think we are seeing that within this hive kind of mentality that is made of pop culture and incentivized political opinions, incentivized social opinions, which cannot be challenged. So there is a sort of like an algorithm that functions that has a sameness within a lot of human beings. And so, yeah, there isn't much to protect, I suppose. But how can one cultivate the inner self, or how can one orient the psyche, the soul, toward truth or expansion, or some sort of unique spark that can ignite and can animate the human being in a way that's functioning beyond the program reality that a lot of us download, simply because it's easier to function under something that's already set, as opposed to charting a new path. And so charting a new path means cognitively starting to zoom out of the patterns that rule us, that react to various stimuli in a predictable way. So that means first starting to see and observe oneself and seeing what patterns we run in what situations, what thoughts, emotions, and behaviors come up automatically, right? Taking stock of all that. And then once we have enough space around that, we can start establishing, reforming those things. We can start introducing choice into our being. We all think we have choice at all times, but I don't think that's true. And philosophically, that's been shown not to be true. Choice starts occurring when we are stimulated in some way, when that means seeing something, hearing something, and whatever that implies, and actually choosing our reaction to it, choosing how we perceive it. In fact, our perception of something is not automatic. We start seeing something and choosing how to frame it, or we can potentially see it for what it is, if possible, and just grasp it with all of our senses. But yeah, I think it's, maybe I overcomplicated that, but it's really clearing the signal from what is automated to what is now chosen and is more sovereign.
When making In Shadow, you said that you told no one about it. You kind of locked yourself away to figure it out and complete it. And a big part of that you said was simply it was focus, it was discipline, it was learning to push out these things, be aware of distracting thoughts. Privacy techniques are in helping you to remain undistracted, right? When we use the ad blocker on the internet, we're not bombarded by all these flashy things. When we use proper email hygiene, we go to our inbox and there's only one or two things that are most important. And so privacy techniques are designed to push away everything so that you can focus on getting out of the rat race and starting a business, or you can focus on more fundamental things. Let me change topic just a little bit here. In Shadow, one of the things that a lot of people notice is that the people in there really seem to lack autonomy. They're just blowing in the wind. They're vulnerable to these manipulators who are kind of behind the scenes. How constructed do you think people are by the world around them in the ways that you've just described in the last few minutes? Are we simply blank slates in your estimation that are quite vulnerable to our environment?
Yeah, well, as pretty much all spiritual traditions of the West and the East say, is a large part of our population, a large part of this new sphere is composed of more mechanical thinking and being. And it's within that ground of our population that some human beings, some sparks of consciousness choose to move out of that soup of an unconscious momentum and see things and know things from a higher vista. So, in general, all of us, like I said earlier, need various different systems in order to grow as human beings and grow as consciousness. So we, from the point of being children, toddlers to children to teenagers to in our 20s and then adults, etc., we go through various stages. And each stage, we need to tap into larger systems that, first of all, make sense of reality for us, make sense of our society, our culture. We have many tasks as humans. We have to sustain ourselves. We have to have some sort of livelihood. There's work involved. There are relationships. There's discipline. There are just so many aspects. The problem, though, also with these systems that we need is a lot of us just end up getting stuck in the momentum and the ease which they provide. And that's very helpful because they frame how things are for us. But then that becomes an unconscious law for us. And so if we just function within these systems and questioning, like for instance, I get my information from the mainstream media, and that is just how things are. And politicians do the best they can, and sometimes they can be incompetent, but that's okay. That's just how things are. There are all these implicit agreements that are part of these systems of awareness within our world. And a certain laziness and entropy kicks in very understandably because things are somewhat complex within this conceptual realm that we live in. And so people, get stuck in these areas and kind of atrophy, I think, because beyond their 20s and 30s, if there's no real change, I think in the 40s, 50s, etc., one is just a set of patterns they're kind of like an agreement, a bind between one person's choice or unconscious choice or lack of expanding into something greater, and the outside structures which feed on human attention, awareness, and compliance. And it's kind of like this seems to be a necessary pattern, or at least it's a pattern that exists right now within our realm.
Let me return again to just some practical techniques, because if it is the case that the physical world is changing our minds, then we should probably be using some physical means to combating that in addition to being more mindful. So I'm just curious, because when one watches In Shadow, it's clear that you have really separated yourself from mainstream narratives. Are there any very physical, practical techniques that you use? Do you have an isolation chamber? Do you wear earplugs when you walk around? Do you practice a kind of Ayn Rand, Fountainhead, Howard Rourke strategy of just completely making sure nothing irrelevant in the environment even enters your mind? There's a great scene where throughout the book, this critic has literally destroyed his career, and the critic at the end talks to him finally and says, Howard, I'm just curious what you think about me. And Howard says, oh, I've never thought about you, and walks away. Any kind of practical techniques for blocking this stuff out?
Yeah, I love that moment in Howard Rourke. In The Fountainhead, I read it when I was 19. I remember that line. really standing out to me. And in my teenage angst, I was always waiting for an opportunity to use it on someone.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think I don't think I ever did. Yeah, so the predominant technique that I use, and it's not so much of a technique as a way of tuning into myself, tuning especially into the parts that feel awkward or I feel some inadequacy or shame. And it's taken me time to be honest with those feelings, to actually recognize them as such, because they can be just a lot of the negative feelings can't even be named, but they're just currents of things that sort of bring up feelings that are then suppressed, and then the mind sort of can get busy and neurotically start like working on projects or just doing busy work or going online or checking an email. A lot of procrastination, actually, if we're honest with ourselves, originates within the functions of the bodily sensations, and that could be in the organs, in the muscle, in the viscera, in the fascia, but overall in this energetic system. And so how do I remain sovereign within like everything that we're bombarded with is I tune into the body and the truth of my body in the moment. By being here in my body, I am truly, as much as I can, in the moment. Sensory signals happen only in the moment, and they can only be felt in the moment. So our real anchor and our biofeedback tool is the bodily system, and again, it's energetic layers. You know, to be an individual, to be truly undivided within our society, one has to basically stand apart from the crowd, because the crowd tends to carry and transmit signals that are basically part of consensual reality. And real truth, I don't think can be found, particularly in our time, in societal norms. So, in order to stand apart from the crowd, one needs more than just mental frameworks to justify, why we're doing that, why we may be good in our place, etc. One needs to, I found in myself, especially in our culture of like guilt and using guilt and shame and fear right now, is to befriend those sensations within us. So the more I befriend my feelings of shame or of guilt or of fear, when they come up, when they're triggered by the outside world, I know their flavor in a sensory aspect. I know the way that they spread out and radiate in my body. And in fact, the more I befriend them, the less they appear and the less they push me out of equilibrium. So if I am in equilibrium and fear for other negative signals come from outside of me to dissuade me from my opinion, to scare me into doing something, to coerce me out of caring what other people think, into behaving a certain way or having a certain opinion, I am now not tied to that necessity, because the sovereign sense of self that I have within my body allows me to be here and to know that my health, my sovereignty, my aliveness is always here, regardless of what's happening in the outside and what is being directed at me. So I would say the body is the tool.
I wanted to bring in this recent topic of Facebook Meta, where it seems that they want to usher in this brave new world where people spend most or part of their lives in virtual reality. And there's a great, I guess it's dystopian film and book called Ready Player One. And as you zoom in, it's just a giant trailer park. The world is now just a giant trailer park, but everybody's in their VR headset, and they seem to be having a good time. And assuming that VR becomes simply an extension of our senses, and people can have all the satisfactions and relationships that they would have in normal existence, it's just another hologram. So I wanted to ask you, do you see any problem in a future where VR is our world instead of our world now?
Yeah, I do see a problem. I actually think about this a lot, and it's been before Meta came out, I was kind of like preemptively philosophizing about it over the last few years. And so, yes, well, first of all, I think a lot of our population is primed to be within this metaverse, in this virtual reality realm, simply because a lot of us are disconnected from our bodies. We are literally disembodied, and we function mostly within this pattern-based conceptual mind that is adopted as the culture, from the culture, as we said earlier. And just as I said earlier, also, we tend to be very mechanical in our relationship to the world and the way we respond to it. So therefore, it's no surprise that people would readily be willing to be in a, again, mechanical program, closed loop kind of system, as opposed to the open loop, as I propose, is connected to divine hierarchies and the cosmic unfolding that is occurring. And so, the metaverse is kind of like a matrix within a matrix. So if we're to suppose, again, as I propose, that we go through this ascendant progression of development of soul consciousness, then if our psyche slash soul is trapped within this virtual synthetic realm run by initially programmed by human minds, but then going off into its own AI algorithm as it goes into ever increasing complexity, that if you follow like my cosmology, that is not connected to source, right? It is actually a closed system, and it functions on various incentives that it creates, which program the consciousness within it of every human being to participate in it. And if I don't know how much you or your audience has followed the technocratic unfoldment, and a lot of those strategies have been out there in think tank papers and UN directives and other things, but if you have a social credit system, especially a social credit system that is tied to like nanotechnology or nano tattoos, as has been developed by Microsoft and others. There's a lot of patented technology. If we have cryptocurrency now being rewarded to human beings for certain kind of behaviors, and worse, for certain kind of emotions and other bodily and other aspects that are measured by various sophisticated biometrics. Those biometrics are hooked up into the VR world, and if we're constantly incentivized to think, feel, and act in certain ways in order to get the various blockchain currencies, so that we can then trade those for nutrition or whatever else, it becomes kind of like a hell realm. I think there's a lot I have to say on this, but I feel like I've veered off from your question. I'd be interested to hear what you think about what I just said.
Well, I think you're right that even if a VR world was able to replicate so much of what the world right now is, you have the problem that somebody is managing this, somebody owns it at the end of the day. The World Economic Forum likes to say that you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. That's the future. The truth is that somebody owns something, somebody's in charge ultimately at the end of the day. And in a piece of software, there's going to be somebody in charge. And for that reason alone, being a student of history and knowing that all authoritarian or closed end systems put power in the hands of a smaller group of people who will use it for their own ends, whether benevolent or not, their own ends. That seems to be enough reason not to want to make this my reality, in addition to some of the other things that you've been saying.
Yeah, there's actually, I totally agree. And one observation I made, and this is again somewhat spiritual, philosophical observation, is there's a tendency, there's a pull, there's sort of a directive in us, an impulse to go into unity, but to unify with a higher order of existence, to embody it, and then to the cliched unity consciousness term is valid in that we can unify with the higher aspect of ourselves and of existence, and even if you want to call it God, which is this apotheosis. But we only reach that when we individuate on our own, when we fully, actually through will, through love, through intelligence, etc., we through surrender, we reach that state. However, the AI impulse, the AI invitation or coercion is actually the opposite. And because we do live in a dual existence, duality is what creates our reality and the spectrum within it. That those are just the rules. We, of course, will have the opposite of that. And the opposite of that is the AI God, right? The very secular, atheistic, and I'm not denigrating that at all. It's just one way to do it. That sort of mentality, I think, also seeks, though unconsciously, some sort of unifying. Like the AI is a god, right? And it's venerated as such. It has superpowers. It is omnipotent, omniscient. It basically can do everything, and it can provide everything. So it's this weird inversion of another god. And what it asks also is of, ultimately, if you follow its logic, is to ultimate unity. But however, that unity goes into more of a hive mind, because to go into the AI realm, it's difficult to imagine a sovereign human being with agency and an awoken human being who is in charge of their senses, thoughts, emotions, to willingly subsume themselves into that realm and then follow the directives within that world. So my argument here is that instead of individuating and uniting as sovereign human beings into a greater evolutionary sort of tract and working together, people will devolve and will actually unify in a non-individuated way without agency, without any sovereignty, and be part of this unity, this illusory unity, in a prison, really.
That's very interesting. When you were saying that, I was thinking of one of the great, and I think in certain respects, forgotten philosophers of the early 20th century, H.G. Wells. Everybody knows him for The Time Machine and War of the World and such, but he gave up on that stuff really quickly and he became a huge proponent of world government, of centralization. And so what H.G. Wells, he has an interesting story. He was one of the first human beings to receive a scientific education. And he was one of the first human beings to have fully saturated Darwinian observations of the world. So he saw things entirely mechanistically, that humans were nothing but animals who have base needs. He would write a dissertation late in life to get a doctorate where he would argue that individuality is a biologically convenient delusion. And as a consequence of this worldview, a lot of the stuff that he wrote, and he wrote almost 100 books, is about how collectivism is superior, about in his Modern Utopia 1905, about how everything should be organized so as to maximize and just kind of appeal to the very basic animal instincts of humankind. And he has all these visions about how to create this perfect collectivist world. And the way he frames it, it's good for everybody. But at the end of the day, when you really look at it, which I do, I'm like, okay, but where's the ruler? And there's always a ruler somewhere. There's always somebody, pulling the strings at some point. So anyway, just a tangent.
Mhm.
H.G. Wells, very interesting
Yeah,
character.
yeah, I just want to comment on that. That is very interesting because that's cool. What you said, I didn't know that about his one of the first people to get a complete scientific education. But yeah, with that reductionist, materialistic, and also mechanical worldview, it's no surprise that his later theories evolved in that way. And also, I would be very interested and curious to see what and to know what H.G. Wells' formative life experience was like. What his threshold and overwhelm of chaos was, right? If he couldn't handle enough chaos, both emotionally and otherwise, within his life, perhaps he was seeking order in all things, and he was not able to handle his own personal individuality, and so he felt that the best thing for consciousness, for human beings, was to be controlled. And like, there's a lot of personal aspects in a lot of these philosophies which I always try to track. I find them very interesting because every node of consciousness, every human being has their own various aberrant reasons as to why they develop a certain approach to existence and how they want to organize it. And interestingly, he ended up tapping into I forget which societies he was part of, but he was sort of the precursor to the technocratic philosophies. That sort of unconscious collective force of fearing chaos, uncertainty, which tends to tend more to be allied to materialistic reductionism. In general, those people, I've noticed, do not like a lot of uncertainty and don't have the bandwidth to handle it. That's why nature, with its uncertainty, with its more feminine, chaotic qualities, as opposed to the masculine, structural and ordered qualities, nature tends to be in the crosshairs of technocracy, right? It's not understood, it's feared, and it's used and abused. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there.
You seem very informed, well educated. You have thought through this stuff a lot. Do you have any recommended reading or viewing or video games? I know that that video games are increasingly the realm of philosophical speculation these days, or anything that you would recommend to people.
Man, I wish I did. I've been actually cut off from media and other things for a while. I'm reading a bunch of books, but they're quite niche, and I'm not sure it's useful for people. But you know what? I'll put out something that's a little off kilter from the mainstream that I think I find very helpful to study, and that's the Pathwork Foundation. People want to check out the Pathwork is it's actually channeled material by a woman called Eva Piriakos, and there are about 250 lectures or so that are extremely helpful to really I found them very useful because they're a mix of psychology and spirituality in a way that shows our inner architecture in a very clear way and gives us a path to really dealing with a lot of the obstructions. So yeah, I would encourage people, if they're open to such things, to check that out. It's worthwhile if one is willing to do the work. I've been influenced a lot by G.I. Gurdjieff's work. He's kind of like Eastern/Western mystic and trickster figure. Although his work is probably not the most inspiring, it's given me a lot of seeing, helped me really frame the world in certain ways. Like the word mechanical is derived from his use of it. G.R. Gurdjieff and one of his pupils who really elucidated all of his work is Uspensky. I've been diving into Rudolf Steiner lately, who is the Austrian scientist and mystic. He's been, of course, extremely influential, though his work is sometimes impenetrable and quite stupefying at points. I would recommend Neil Kramer, who has he's a mystic philosopher that lives in America right now. He's a British man. I've worked with him personally. His Rome casts are incredible. He's influenced me a lot over the last 10 years.
Thank you very much, Lubomir. Is there anywhere that you would like to send people? Obviously, we'll have all kinds of links for it in shadow. Is there anywhere else you would like to direct people to if they wanted to follow you and your work?
Yeah, I'm trying to be more active on Twitter and Instagram, though I'm not very successful at it. But people can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Lubomir Arsov. Yeah, if you just want to follow up some of my thoughts and other musings.
Great. And that's for everybody. Lubomir, Lubomir Arsov, Arsov. Thank you again, Lubomir, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Gabriel. I enjoyed this conversation immensely. All the best.